Last couple times Georgia and Tennessee have played, the line has settled in at 9 or 9.5. In 2002, 2012, 2022, easy enough for me to say, when these two teams played the game of the year in college football's regular season, number one versus number one, Georgia was a 9.5 point favorite in Sanford Stadium. A year ago, this line was that Georgia was a 9 point favorite at Neyland Stadium. And obviously, everyone knows how this game has gone lately. Since Kirby Smart taken over, Georgia's lost one game against the Vols, and that was a that game was nuts. First of all, but the miracle throw from Josh Dobbs to I can't remember his name. He's a really good receiver, so Jennings, I think, won the Vols that game. So this year the line is exactly at, well, it depends on where you look, but it's either 9 or 9.5. So that's where this thing is settled out. What does that mean? It gives Georgia about like a 78-80% chance of winning the game. That is a pretty substantial amount. But I got to say, both these teams are really in a dicey spot. I mean, the loser of this game, if it's Georgia, I would say I find it very hard to believe that they would get into the playoff. The more I think about it, the more dicey I think it is for Tennessee, too. Their best win is over Alabama, which is a great win. Don't get me wrong. But after that, it's not been great. I mean, like, they don't have anything else to lean on. They don't have win over anyone significant. I mean, they lost to Arkansas. The beginning of the season, they played NC State, who is pretty bad now. Tennessee over Oklahoma on the road. They go to overtime with the Gators. They beat Alabama. They beat Kentucky at home. And then they handle Mississippi State. Last week might be the best game they've played in a while, to be honest with you. The Alabama game notwithstanding, I think it was probably the best game they played this season. But the State game was up there too. So this is a really do or die moment for Tennessee. I think Tennessee gets in. I mean, I just don't see how they don't get in. They'd play for the SEC championship if they win this game, almost certainly. I mean, Vanderbilt would have to beat them in Nashville. I just don't see. I don't see that happening. But we've seen Vanderbilt do pretty well at Vanderbilt Stadium. I mean, they knocked off Virginia Tech. They beat Alabama. They had another decent win there. I feel like Virginia Tech, Alabama, and someone else. And then, they, of course, played Texas pretty well. They got smashed pretty hard by South Carolina. They may be running out of steam. I'm not sure. But this is a critical moment at Georgia. A week ago with, we've seen a lot of tests this season. We've seen Georgia be tested a lot. And the bulk of those tests have come away from Athens. I mean, you got the opener against Clemson. People look back on that and they think, oh, well, they really smashed Clemson. And they did, but that was a first half where it was pretty evident Georgia was better. They only scored 6 points. Then you go on the road to Kentucky, which is a tighter game than it probably should have been, but it was very tight. But they have had to fight their way through on the road at Alabama, on the road at Texas, neutral site with the Gators, and then on the road at Ole Miss. And you add the neutral with Clemson, no one's played 5 games like that. And so here they are getting a real big test at home against Tennessee. And, of course, they still have the Jackets remaining. And, as well as Georgia Tech played against Miami to defeat Miami, I'm not sure. Tech is so up and down, y'all. I mean, they struggled to beat a bad Florida State team. They lost to Syracuse. They lost to Louisville. They beat Duke by 10. I think that was a really good win, actually. They beat North Carolina by 7. They really got rolled by Notre Dame, and then they lost to Virginia Tech. If Georgia doesn't beat Georgia Tech, you got a whole lot bigger problems than are you going to the playoff or not. I mean, that would be complete failure by this staff. And I think that the idea, that a Tech team that scored 24 against Florida State, 28 against Syracuse, 19 against Louisville, 24 against Duke. Their biggest performance was North Carolina team that has rolled over and died. They scored 13 against Notre Dame, 6 against Georgia Tech. I mean, this is not a high-profile offense. I understand Haynes King has been out a lot in some of these games. But, if you're Georgia and you can't beat Georgia Tech at home, then Kirby needs to look in the mirror. So I don't expect that at all right now. But Tennessee's going to be a real challenge, no question. If they get they're first of all, defensively, the Vols have improved noticeably, I would say. They have improved noticeably from where they were certainly a couple of years ago, but just generally speaking now along the way. I mean, they're the number 5 defense in the country in terms of total yards. That is a really good, metric. They allow about 2 touchdowns a game, something like that. It's not been a lot. Now, with, much like some of these other teams, Tennessee ran up some really good numbers and some pretty bad, out of conference. Clemson's not NC State. NC State's bad, and that was Tennessee's out of conference. So, you've got 2 of the best defensive teams in the country. Georgia at number 13, Tennessee at 5. These are 2 really good teams on the defensive side of the ball. Offensively, they've both struggled. I know that sounds strange to say about Tennessee, but it's true. They have not. They have in league play. They have slowed down appreciably. I mean, you look at their non-league play, they score 69, 51, and 71. I mean, that's a lot. And you go from that to 25, 14, 23 in overtime, 24, 28, 33. I mean, you're much more. I mean, they've only scored once over 30. I think they might have to score 30 over Georgia to win this game. They have the ability to, but I don't know. They're better running the ball, I think, than they used to be in the past. But I think what would kind of concern me if I'm Tennessee is when you look at their when you look at the way that they've always played. Georgia has done with Kirby has done a really good job of slowing that down. Like they score a bunch of points and then they deal with Georgia and they get kind of slowed down. They played 4 home games in a row. They haven't played on the road since they went to Arkansas and lost. They've only played, I think they've only played 2 road games that are true road games so far. So this will be a challenge for them. They've managed to score a lot lower, about 19, 20 points a game in league play on the road. Well, on the road, period. They haven't done any other. They're playing. They're 19.5 points a game on the road. Versus they've not. I mean, look. There's a reason why Georgia is a relatively heavy favorite to win this game, and Tennessee's got some superlatives for sure, but Georgia wasn't playing 3 Tennessee Techs. I mean, Georgia doesn't have those. They've got Clemson and Tech, and then they've got Tennessee Tech, who they play at the beginning of the season. They got Massachusetts. They haven't played those out of conference games, and this is Georgia's last conference game. So, but the other problem is for Georgia is whereas they scored, against major teams, 34 against Clemson, 34 against Alabama, 31 against Auburn, 41 against State, 30 against Texas, 34 against the Gators. They have bookended that in conference play with 10 against Ole Miss and 13 against Kentucky. They're just not where they need to be offensively right now. Like, it's bad. It's not like, oh, we don't know. It's bad. The run game, 104th in the country. Like, you want to know why Georgia's not good right now, comparatively speaking? They're not running the ball, and it's all there is to it is the offensive line is not where it needs to be. It's that simple. And why is that the case? Do you look at Mike Bobo? Do you look at Carson Beck? Do you look at Stacey Searles? Do you look at Kirby Smart? You have to look at everything. I mean, if the coaches and players get patted on the back when there's success, you have to be able to criticize them when there's not success. And scoring it twice in a season under 14 points at Georgia, no, that's not acceptable. And, again, I understand the explanations for it because there are plenty. But I would say if the offensive line is not going to do a better job of producing a run game, you will not win running for fewer than 100 yards in a game. It's just like I can pull my data out, but I don't need the facts to tell me off the top of my head what it is. and they'll have a hard time against Tennessee. I mean, Tennessee is pretty good, against the run. You have the number 9 total rushing defense in the country. That's really good. I mean, that's what Georgia typically is. So, they are going to have to establish immediately that they're the more physical team. Doesn't mean you can't run on Tennessee. I mean, Kentucky went for 200. I mean, that's a lot of. They lost some yardage because of, sacks and so forth. But when you when you run for 197, you're running the ball. That's effective. That's plenty enough to get the job done in the grand scheme of things. That's a lot. The Gators ran enough on them. 178. Now they lost 40 yards, so there's 138. But again, if you're in that zone, then you're doing fine. Arkansas, like some of these teams are not good teams. Florida, Arkansas. When you're not a good team, what you do is you just say, well, we're just going to try to run it. And you see the same thing with the Hogs. I mean, they're running effectively. Alabama, God knows. I mean, Alabama did not. I mean, Tennessee basically stopped them / slowed them down. I mean, Tennessee held them under a net under 100 yards rushing. That was a great performance from the Vols that night in Knoxville. So it's going to be, there's no certainty that you just run on them. There's no certainty of that. But if, they have been run on in league play. They have been run on in league play. Now, out of league, no. They really shut everybody down and did a good job. But that 9, you look at that 9 and, that seems like a lot. I know when it got as low as 8.5, but I saw it go to 11.5 before that. 11.5 points, that's a lot. That's a lot of points in a game for this magnitude. But look, Georgia's the better team. But Tennessee has got, there's plenty to be aware of with Tennessee. I mean, Georgia's got to play better than they did against Ole Miss, and probably better than they did against Florida. Carson has to play better. If Carson plays like he did against Ole Miss, against the Gators, Georgia wins that game by a lot. If he plays like he did against the Gators, against Ole Miss, then they really get smoked. You're allowed to play your best game. We've just not really seen that from Georgia's offense yet. And, if for those of you who are just catching on and you're this late into the video, I mean, I played sports in college, and the biggest thing that I listen to from Kirby is what's going on at practice. Are guys practicing? And I know it sounds like, oh, well, yeah, but how you practice is really important. And that guys aren't practicing, like Tate Ratledge, you can't really expect him to play in the game and get yourself ready to go. I've been watching The Last Dance, which is the documentary about the Chicago Bulls and their run, and it talked about when Dennis Rodman took an in-season vacation and came back, and Phil Jackson, the coach at the time, was trying to push him, saying, hey, you're not just going to get it back in the games. You don't. You have to stress yourself during practice. And I think the other thing about this game, Georgia, if Georgia's got all their working parts, all their moving parts, if ETN is squared away, if Morris, Ratledge, ETN are all in there, and they play physical and decide, I don't care if we gain a yard here or not, I'm going to be physical with the person in front of me, and they do that and they attack like that every single play, they'll win this game probably by more than 9. But they've not shown that they're either capable or willing to do that the whole time this season. And that's the thing that's so important. They're going to have to attack Tennessee on the line of scrimmage. Florida did it. Kentucky did it. I mean, Alabama did not effectively do it. And when you don't, there are ramifications from that. I warned everybody watching here that the Ole Miss game was a very losable game. This game, I'm not sure I'm quite in that category the way I was with the Ole Miss game, but it is a game they can lose. They shouldn't, but it is a game that they could lose. Now, what does that mean? Let's cross that threshold when it happens, if it does, and take it from there. I want to add this, though, because I know some Tennessee people watch this and opposing fans. 10-2 Tennessee is not in the playoff. I'm going to need a really good explanation, and I'm not going to accept it probably. Because the notion that Penn State is better than Tennessee, I just find very hard to take seriously. This league is a complete gauntlet. It would be if Georgia loses this game, I understand them not being in the playoff. I'm not saying they're not one of the best 12 teams. They probably still would be, but I understand them not being in the playoffs. Tennessee loses this game and we figure out how not to include them, there's something going on wrong, and there's really no advantage to playing in the SEC, because if Tennessee were in the Big 12 or the ACC, they would almost certainly win those leagues. Not certainly. They'd win the ACC, though. I'll tell you that. Big 12, maybe not. It's a slightly more difficult league, but Georgia 9.5, 9.5, 10-point favorite. What do you think? Tell me down below.